Okay, you have to hear about this.
Hey.
I just tried something completely wild, and I'm honestly still a bit blown away.
Intriguing. What is it?
It's called the Supermind Signal, and it's this sound wave thing,
Okay.
apparently based on neuroscience from America and Europe.
Right. I think I saw the materials you sent over.
Yeah. So the idea is it uses like brain entrainment
Mm.
to kickstart your alpha brain waves
Mm-hmm. Alpha waves.
and potentially, get this, transform your life
Yeah.
by, boosting your brain power,
That's quite a claim.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And the crazy part, it's literally as easy as putting on headphones for a few minutes.
How few.
8 minutes. That's it. 8 minutes, they say.
Just listening.
Yeah, you just lay back, listen to this relaxing sound wave. No meditation, no trying to empty your mind,
Your mantras.
no chanting, definitely no homework or anything. I was honestly expecting something, way more complicated.
Understandable. Effortless transformation is always appealing.
Totally. And they say it starts working the first time you listen.
Seriously. The very first time.
Transform your life in 8 minutes just by listening.
Yeah.
It sounds, I don't know, almost too good to be true, right?
It certainly raises questions.
So yeah, you saw it. I know you were curious about what's behind the Supermind signal. Let's dive in.
Absolutely. Let's unpack it. What makes it tick and what might actually be happening in the brain.
Exactly.
So what's fascinating here really is the concept of brain entrainment itself.
Okay.
Have you heard of tuning forks?
Sure. Right.
If you strike one, another one nearby with a similar frequency, it'll start vibrating too, right? In sympathy. Brain entrainment is kind of the same idea, that external rhythms, like the sound wave they're using,
Yeah.
can potentially influence your brain's own natural electrical rhythms.
Okay, so the sound influences the brain waves.
That's the theory. And actually, some of the foundational work, like Harry Jasper's back in the 40s, you included that.
Right, yeah, those in the sources.
That really helped to map out these different brainwave types, showed these rhythms exist and correlate with different mental states.
So Jasper established the different waves exist.
He provided a framework, yes. That's really the basis for this idea that we can influence them externally, which is what the Supermind Signal is trying to do.
Got it. So Jasper's work shows the patterns exist. And this, Supermind Signal,
Yeah.
it's aiming to nudge your brain into that alpha state specifically.
Correct. Alpha is the target.
Alpha waves.
Mhm.
Why them? What exactly are alpha waves and why are they supposedly the key to unlocking this supermind?
Yeah, that's the central piece of the puzzle, isn't it? Alpha waves are a type of brainwave, typically oscillating between 8 and 12 hertz. Frequency-wise,
Okay, 8 to 12 hertz.
think of them as maybe your brain's idling gear. It's ready for action, but not intensely focused on something specific.
Idling gear, I like that. Relaxed but ready.
Exactly. It's often associated with a state of relaxed wakefulness, a sort of calm alertness. Like, you know that feeling when you're maybe daydreaming? Or just quietly reflecting. Not actively concentrating, but definitely not asleep either.
Yeah, I can picture that. Okay, so the idea is by boosting these alpha waves, you're tapping into that calm, focused state, and that translates to better brain power. Is that the link they're making?
That's the core claim, yes. And look, there is research connecting alpha activity to various cognitive functions.
Like what?
Well, for instance, there was a study by Nan and colleagues back in 2012. I think that was also in the materials.
Yes, I saw that one.
They looked at alpha neurofeedback training and short-term memory, and they found some positive effects.
Okay, neurofeedback.
And another one, Grosslin et al., in 2021, looked at alpha activity modulation through neurofeedback learning, but in more sort of real-world settings.
Neurofeedback. Wait, that sounds a bit more involved than just listening to a sound wave, though?
It is.
Is that the same thing as this brain entrainment they're talking about with the Supermind Signal? Because that sounds like way less effort.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same. Neurofeedback usually involves real-time monitoring of your brain activity, often with EEG.
Okay, so you see your brain waves.
Right. And then you get feedback, visual, auditory, to help you learn to consciously regulate those patterns. So you are actively trying to influence your brainwaves.
Ah, okay. Active effort.
Yes. Brain entrainment, on the other hand, like we said with the tuning forks, it's more passive. An external stimulus, the sound, is used to encourage your brainwaves to sync up with its frequency.
So it's like the sound does the work.
In a way, it's like the difference between learning to ride a bike yourself, which takes active practice,
Right.
versus just watching someone else ride. One requires your active participation, the other is more passive observation, or in this case, listening.
Ah, okay, got it. So the Supermind Signal is going for that passive synchronization through sound.
Seems so.
They also mentioned synchronizing neurons in both hemispheres. What's the significance of that? Is there something special about getting like both sides of your brain working together?
Well, the idea of hemispheric synchronization, it's been around a while. There's this popular notion that it leads to, you know, enhanced cognitive function, creativity, that sort of thing.
Right, the whole brain idea.
Exactly.
Got it.
But it's important to approach this with some nuance. While interhemispheric communication is crucial for lots of brain functions,
Uh-huh.
the kind of simplistic idea of just getting both hemispheres to perfectly sync up for some massive brain power boost, that's not really fully supported by current neuroscience.
Okay.
Actually, there was work by Thomas Hines back in '87 that critiqued some of the more simplistic left brain, right brain stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. Sounds a bit like those old myths about only using 10% of your brain, doesn't it?
It has that kind of feel, yeah.
Yeah.
Oversimplified, perhaps.
So, okay. While alpha waves are linked to states that might be good for learning or relaxing, the claim of instantly transforming your life with this specific sound wave, that's where we need to be a bit more critical.
Precisely. Yes. Look, the references provided do touch on alpha activity and its potential roles. Like that Nicholson study from 2023.
On PTSD.
Yes, normalizing alpha rhythms in PTSD through neurofeedback. That's interesting because it shows alpha modulation can potentially address specific conditions, but it's quite a leap from that kind of targeted active neurofeedback therapy to saying that a passive listening experience will produce the same kind of, sustained significant changes in cognitive abilities for everyone.
Right. And they mention it starts working the very first time you listen. Is that plausible with brain entrainment? Could you feel something noticeable right away?
It's certainly possible, yeah. You could experience a shift in your mental state during or maybe shortly after listening.
Like feeling calmer.
Exactly. If the sound wave promotes relaxation, you might well feel calmer, more at ease, and that could be just the brain's natural tendency to respond to rhythm.
Okay.
But whether that immediate subjective feeling equates to a fundamental, lasting transformation of brain power, like the marketing suggests, that's much less clear. Is that feeling actually tied to the specific neurological changes they're claiming? That's a key question.
Okay, let's unpack that activation a bit more. They say it activates your alpha. What does that really mean? Like in terms of brain activity, are we talking a big, measurable increase everywhere?
Well, activation in this context likely means an increase in the prevalence and maybe the amplitude, the strength of alpha wave activity. Probably in certain brain regions.
And you can measure that?
Yes, EEG can measure those kinds of changes. But the extent of it, how consistent it is, that can vary a lot. Person to person, depending on the sound wave itself, other factors. It's probably not like a uniform on switch for alpha across the whole brain.
Right. Okay. And the fact that they stress you don't need to do anything else, no meditation, no mantras, that sounds really appealing, especially if you find those things hard or time-consuming.
Absolutely. That's part of the appeal.
But does that also mean it might be less effective in the long run if you're not actively engaging?
That's a really valid point to consider. Practices like meditation involve active engagement, right? You're learning to control your own mental states. Neurofeedback, like we said, also needs active participation. A passive approach, just listening. It might offer more immediate effects, sure, but they could also be more transient, more temporary.
So the depth of change might be different.
The long-term impact and the depth of change could differ significantly, yes.
They list a whole bunch of scientific references.
Yeah.
We touched on a few about alpha waves and neurofeedback. Were there any others on that list that kind of jumped out at you related to this Supermind Signal idea?
Well, it's interesting seeing a reference to Baldwin's 1974 paper. It was on kinetic art and subliminal stimulation.
Subliminal, how does that fit?
It's not directly about brainwaves or sound, but it touches on that idea of influencing perception below conscious awareness, which is sort of related to how passive entrainment is claimed to work.
Ah, okay. Influence it without you realizing it.
Kind of. And similarly, there was Rosenboom's work from '72 exploring using alpha waves to actually create sounds or light for art. It just shows there's been this long-standing interest in the interplay between brain activity and, sensory stuff.
Using brainwaves for art. Interesting.
Yeah.
And there was one about hypnagogic sleep and creativity, and another about sleep disturbance and dementia. How do those fit in?
Those references, I think, broaden the context. They highlight how important different brain states are for things like creativity and memory.
Right.
The hypnagogic state, that bit between being awake and asleep,
Yeah, the drowsy state.
that is often considered a really creative sweet spot. And the Sternasek research just underscores how vital healthy sleep patterns are for cognitive health overall.
So they're not directly about the Supermind signal.
Not directly, no, but they remind us that overall brain function is complex. Achieving peak cognitive performance isn't just about flipping one switch, like boosting alpha. It's likely multifaceted.
Okay, right. So to kind of wrap up our deep dive on this Supermind signal, it's a sound wave product. Aims to use brain entrainment to boost your alpha brainwaves.
Correct.
And the promise is, well, increased brain power, maybe even life transformation, all from just 8 minutes of listening.
Yes, that's the core premise. And it does draw upon established principles like brain entrainment and the known links between alpha activity and certain mental states, relaxation, focused attention.
And we've seen there is science supporting the idea that alpha activity matters for cognition,
Definitely.
and that techniques like neurofeedback can be used to change it, like in those studies we mentioned.
Exactly. The research by Grosslin on neurofeedback learning, Nan's work on memory, Nicholson's findings on PTSD, they all point to potential benefits from influencing alpha rhythms.
And Jasper's early work laying the groundwork.
Yes, mapping the territory, so to speak, providing that foundation for understanding these different brain states.
But, and this feels like a big but, we need that nuanced perspective, right? The leap from just passively listening for 8 minutes to achieving some profound, lasting transformation. That might be a pretty significant leap.
It seems like a significant leap, yes. And you always have to consider the placebo effect, too.
Right. Hammond's paper on that in neurofeedback, that's always a factor with these kinds of interventions.
Precisely. The relationship between specific brain waves and really complex outcomes like intelligence or, transforming your life, it's likely very intricate. Lots of variables.
So entrainment might induce some change?
It can induce changes in brainwave activity, yes. But the long-term impact, the real functional significance of those changes from just passive listening, that needs more investigation.
Okay. So considering how different states of mind, even weird ones like being on the edge of sleep,
The hypnagogic state, yeah.
how those can influence our thinking, our creativity, what do you think the potential is for us to consciously influence our own brainwaves? Like really shape them?
That's the really fascinating question, isn't it? It highlights this ongoing exploration into brain plasticity, our ability to actually interact with our own brain activity.
Yeah.
And thinking about the different approaches we discussed, the passive listening of something like the Supermind Signal versus the active engagement of neurofeedback, what do you think the future holds there for really personalized brainwave modulation? As research keeps going, we'll likely get a much deeper understanding of how targeted interventions could support cognition and well-being.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, ultimately, this Supermind signal, whether it works exactly as claimed or not.
Yeah,
It definitely brings up some fascinating questions about how we can interact with our own minds.
absolutely.
Definitely something to keep thinking about.